Thank you and welcome to the Rare Books LA Virtual Book Fair. We're so excited to have an amazing panel from the Huntington Library here with us today. I just want to give you a quick tip. If you're new to Zoom, if you go up to the right-hand corner of your screen where it says View, and you switch your view to speaker view, you're going to get a better experience seeing all the presentations that are going to be shared with us today. So I just want to take a minute to thank some of our sponsors who have allowed us to have so much wonderful programming during this virtual book fair. We're so grateful to Fine Books and Collections Magazine, to biblio.com, and to KPCC, your local NPR radio station. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Claudia Funke, who is the Avery Chief Curator and Associate Director of Library Collections at the Huntington Library, Art Museum, and Botanical Gardens. Claudia?
Thank you so much, Jen, for your warm welcome and also this invitation to present at the fair. And I am now going to share my screen. Okay. As Jen said, I'm Claudia Funke. I'm the Avery Chief Curator at the Huntington. And as many of you will know, the Huntington Library, Art Museum, and Botanical Gardens is a collections-based research and educational institution located in San Marino in Los Angeles County, California. The Huntington was founded 101 years ago in 1919. And we're celebrating that. We just got off our centennial celebration with this virtual presentation today, the Huntington Library at 101, 11 million items and still counting. And that is the truth, 11 million items, give or take. We are one of the great independent research libraries of the world, and we're still acquiring, just like those of you shopping today. We purchase at book fairs from dealer catalogs and by special offers on our endowed funds. We have our Library Collectors Council and angel donors who help make magic acquisitions happen. And over the years, we have been and continue to be the fortunate recipients of many outstanding gifts in kind and bequests, which magnify the Huntington's documentary abundance. I'm delighted to be joined today by 6 of the library's 14 curators. Li Wei Yang, Curator of Pacific Rim Collections, Stephen Tabor, Curator of Rare Books, Vanessa Wilkie, William A. Moffat, Curator of Medieval Manuscripts and British History, Clay Stalls, Curator of California and Hispanic Collections, Aaron Chase, Assistant Curator of Architecture and Photography, and Dan Lewis, Debner Senior Curator for the History of Science and Technology. In lightning round fashion, we will introduce you to 7 remarkable Huntington holdings and the singular stories of how they came to live at the library. This is a book fair, and acquiring minds, they want to know. We hope to be fast enough to have 10 to 15 minutes for questions at the end. So I'm going to begin, not at the beginning, but before the beginning, with these 4 magnificent photographic albums, which may well were in the possession of Henry E. Huntington, our founder, before he even became one of the early 20th century's greatest book and manuscript collectors. These 4 volumes contain 174 mammoth plate photographs, contact prints made from wet collodion plate negatives, sized just under 15 by 18 inches. They are the work of the great photographer of the American West, Carlton Watkins. Watkins was originally from Oneonta, New York, and it is there, as a boy, that he met Collis P. Huntington, with whom he would travel to San Francisco in the wake of the California Gold Rush. Collis was looking to establish a branch of the family hardware store out west and ended up becoming one of the big four in railroads. Watkins learned the art of photography, and his mammoth plates became collected artworks in their own time, those of Yosemite being instrumental in President Lincoln declaring the region a natural preserve in 1864. These four volumes were titled by the subjects of their images by Watkins: Central Pacific Railroad and Views Adjacent, Summits of the Sierra, Arizona and Views Adjacent to the Southern Pacific Railroad, Photographic Views of Kern County. Carleton did work for both the Central Pacific and Southern Pacific Railroads, with a special railroad card provided for him and his equipment. He clearly felt a debt to Collis, who helped him financially at key points. He named his son after Collis, and it is presumed he gave these volumes to Collis, and most likely for others that matched these in size and binding, which were until recently in the collection of the Hispanic Society of America in New York, founded by Collis's stepson, Archer Huntington, son of his second wife, Arabella. Collis died in 1900, and Arabella and Henry were his two heirs. So the assumption is the Hispanic Society volumes come through Arabella to Archer. But in 1913, Arabella and Henry would be joined in marriage and reunite Collis's fortune, if not the 8 albums. 3 of the Hispanic Society's volumes were recently reported to be headed across Manhattan to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. One will remain at the Hispanic Society. But, you know, our volumes, they're not going anywhere. Their photographs splendidly demonstrate Watkins' talent for pictorial composition, equal to the celebrated American landscape painters of his day, while highlighting the pristine beauty of the West. They also depict the intrusion of modern transportation infrastructure across the natural terrain and the laborers, here Chinese, who built the railroads. They showcase the immensity of the land and its natural life through an appropriately oversized format. They include the ruins of indigenous societies, also monumental, the Casa Grande. Everything is big in America. And they indicate obliquely the intersection of Native Americans and the manifest destiny invasion of transportation technology and European Americans. You can see the 3 Native Americans by the back of the SPRR car. Henry E. Huntington would purchase several substantial collections of Native American photographs by Edward S. Curtis, Carl Moon, and Frederick Monson in the 1920s. The Spanish West is documented through its architecture, still a fantastic sight to come upon, and the fruits of irrigation, which would make California really a grower's paradise, are shown through a proto-modernist lens. The Huntington holds some 400 further Watkins photographs that were presumably gifted by him to Collis and found in Henry E. Huntington's library following his death. And the library has added hundreds more Watkins photographs through gift and purchase since then. These are now all described in our online catalog with beautiful records. The 4 albums were about to be digitized before our closure for COVID-19, and we look forward to making their contents available on the Huntington Digital Library as soon as health and object safety protocols permit imaging. So Henry E. Huntington, he set the library's precedent and practice for receiving over-the-top gifts and bequests. And now Li Wei Yang will tell us about another remarkable gift to Mr. Huntington received at the end of his life.
Good afternoon. My name is Li Weiyan. I'm the curator for Pacific Rim Collections. And today I'm going to talk about a Chinese rare book called 经典释文. This can be translated as an explication of the text of the canon. So this is the only Chinese rare book that made it into the library during Henry Huntington's lifetime. And it was originally compiled by a Suzhou-based scholar named Lu Deming during the 7th century. And the book offers explanations of both the sounds and the meaning of individual characters that are found in many of the Chinese classics. And this is important because when it comes to classical Chinese, some refer to as literary Chinese, this is not an easy language to master. And depending on the context, depending on the grammar, a single character can mean different things in different contexts. And so a reference book like this was very important to scholars who are devoting their entire lives to study the Chinese classics and to pass the imperial examination in order to obtain important government posts through this way. This particular volume is a glossary to the Book of Change, or what we know here in the West as the I Ching, and it's subtitled as the phonetic and semantic explication of the Book of Change. So I think the subtitle provides a little bit better explanation about the origin of this book. And so how did this book end up at Huntington Library? So on May 2nd, 1927, William Bixby gifted this book to the Huntington. And here's the letter that he wrote and attached to the book. So Henry Huntington and William Bixby came into contact in 1918 after Huntington purchased a remarkable and large collection of rare books and manuscripts from Bixby's personal library. At the time when this book was gifted to Huntington, Bixby incorrectly thought that the book was from the 10th century. I'm not exactly sure. Maybe he was told by where he purchases books from, and he even enlisted the name of 2 scholars from the University of Chicago to help authenticate this book as from the 10th century. So for a very long time, this book was thought to be the oldest printed book here at the Huntington. It even had a special case custom made to house the book. But in 2014, with the help from the National Library in China, we were able to determine that the book actually dates back to the Ming Dynasty, so roughly from the 14th to the 17th century. However, we do think that it was not printed. So this is a woodblock printed book, but we do think that the woodblock that was used during the Ming Dynasty was actually older. So we think that the actual woodblock was cut during the Yuan Dynasty around the 13th century. And this is one of the most difficult things about authenticating Chinese books, because a lot of times the original print dates is either not listed in the book, or that because they were using original woodblock dating back 100, 200, 300, 400 years old, that they still retain the original print date, though the book was printed much, much later. So I also wanted to speak to you about the book's historical movements across China and the US. So the record shows that William Bixby had traveled to China, to Japan, and to Korea in the year 1919. And on this trip, he was focusing on meeting as many book dealers, scholars, and collectors, and learn more about Chinese printing history. And we were able to locate diary entry that was published by Bixby saying that, quote, "I'm going to try to get 1 or 2 Chinese printed books, printed long before printing was dreamed of in Europe." So as you can see here on the title page, on the bottom right, you can see a faint red collector seal revealing the books that was once owned by a Qing Dynasty scholar official named Lin Qing. So at the time, this book, around the 19th century, we know that book was housed in a small and exquisite garden that was fairly close to the Forbidden Palace. And so this government official, Lin Qing, has actually created his personal library inside a small garden called the Half-Acre Garden, 半亩园. And this name is very famous today. It's been appropriated by a lot of other gardens and also restaurants by using this name, Half-Acre Garden. And the seal itself reads, it's translated as Paradise Bliss Realm. So indicating that the scholar wanted to carve out this little personal space for him to enjoy the books and the garden by himself. So even though today the book itself is not the oldest printed book at the Huntington, but it is still a very important part of the Pacific Rim collections here at the Huntington, where we focus on Asian American history, East Asian rare books, maritime history, and a whole other, and many other subject areas that where we are focusing on preservation of historical documents. And I also want to take this opportunity to let you know that even though this is not the oldest book at the Huntington, I am actually going to curate a collection, exhibition called Printed in 1085, where we will talk about the oldest print at the Huntington. It is a Chinese Buddhist canon that was printed during the Song Dynasty in the year 1085, where I will talk about the book's history and its importance to Chinese Buddhism. So I hope you'll get to see it. Thank you.
So thank you, Li Wei. Along with the garden theme, it is worth noting that the Huntington has just opened to the public the highly anticipated expansion of its renowned Chinese garden. And now let's hear an entirely different story of Lost and Found from Steve Tabor.
Thank you, Claudia. Here we go. I'd like to introduce all of you to the 1587 edition of Holinshed's Chronicles, Raphael Holinshed. This is the second edition and the one that William Shakespeare relied upon heavily and sometimes outright plagiarized to write his English history plays. I'm assuming that most of you watching this are book collectors, so you might find it annoying that the bindings are mismatched. Thereby hangs a tale. It begins with Jerry Melton, a larger-than-life character who taught dramatic arts at Hollywood High. In 1975, he was in London, browsing in the basement of one of the famous antiquarian establishments. It was their so-called hospital, where they kept defective copies and other items considered unworthy of putting upstairs. Here, Melton found a whole shelf of imperfect Holinsheds of various dates. He was drawn in particular to this set of the second edition, not a great copy. You can see it has some problems with the preliminaries. It isn't a rare book, but it's a famous one. After Melton got home, he decided to order it. I need to mention that physical volume 1 in this edition contains 2 parts, as the title page says, so this can be confusing. I'll try to be consistent by referring to physical volumes 1 and 2, as you see here. So when the books arrived and he sat down with them for a better look, he noticed some funny marks in volume 2. And I'm not talking about the stuff at the upper right, which is just some random Elizabethan practicing his handwriting. Almost every page had lighter blots and scratches that to Melton looked a lot like proofreader's marks. So he brought the books to the dealer Harry Levinson and then to Carrie Bliss, who was curator of rare books at the Huntington. And Carrie confirmed what Harry said, what Jerry suspected, that the notes in volume 2, volume 1 didn't have any, were indeed proofreader's marks, evidently contemporary. And by the way, did Jerry have any thoughts about what he might do with the books? Well, Jerry took them back home to enjoy and study, but 7 years later they came to an agreement and the Huntington bought the set. This was April of 1982. Before the books were even paid for, occurred one of those occurrences that come along once in a decade. In that same month, Christie's published a catalog for an upcoming auction containing another set of the 1587 Holinshed. This set had about 2,000 proof corrections in physical volume 1 only. The implication was obvious. Sometime in the distant past, the Melton set and the Christie set had crossed paths. At that time, they must have had bindings that were more easily confusable. They swapped partners, and the 2 bigamist sets went off to live their respective lives. One of them got rebound in the 18th century and rebacked in the 20th. This set ended up in the hospital of the London bookseller. The other was rebound by Francis Bedford in the 19th century and turned up with a book dealer in Northern California who consigned it to Christie's. Clearly, the Huntington had a responsibility to reunite the annotated volumes, but these are lean times for us, and a successful bid would need some outside backers. Somehow the library was able to mobilize an army of 28 donors, and in the end we got the lot for £10,000 against a pre-sale estimate of 3,000 to 5,000. After hundreds of years, the model was rectified. Here we have the annotated volumes on the left and the others on the right. These two promiscuous sets now live in different buildings in our rare book storage, because whenever they get close to each other, they try to swap partners again. So what is the use of 4,000 Elizabethan proof corrections? Incidentally, the largest cache of them in the world. Several hands were at work on the job of correction, but the main one was not just any in-house proofreader. Instead, it seems to have been Abraham Fleming, who was the chief editor of this edition and the author of part of it. The identification is based partly on this handwritten grumpy Latin tag, which Fleming is known to have used elsewhere. It translates, "Whatever you give to ungrateful people is thrown away." And it continues here, quoth Abraham Fleming. The marks themselves are pretty easy to read. Proofreading style hasn't changed much in 400 years. Most of the corrections are extremely picky, having to do with the way the letters line up and micro adjustments to spacing. You go through just a couple of pages of this and you get a picture of a very compulsive personality. The connection to Fleming is further strengthened by the fact that some of the sheets in these two marked up volumes are proof sheets, the stage before the earliest ones that made it into the finished books. Normally, proof sheets would eventually get recycled into book bindings or sold for other structural uses. From the 16th century, they're pretty darn rare. Only someone with a direct link to the press would be able to get his hands on a set of them, and Fleming was the most likely person. He collaborated with the printer on this edition for 2 years. On this page, you can see the ghosts of the wooden strips and other material in the margins that kept the type in place. Before the main print run, they would cut a mask to keep these elements from touching the paper. Also notice that the text on the back of this leaf is way out of line with the front. During proofing, they didn't worry about getting this right. So in two respects, our Holinshed is a time machine that takes us into a London printing shop of 1587 for a glimpse of early parts of the production cycle that we weren't supposed to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Books, they do move around. And now for a story of manuscripts reunited from Vanessa Wilkie.
Thank you, Claudia. So our program today is called The Huntington at 101. And I'm going to tell you a story about a collection that took 95 of those 101 years to bring together. In May,
You're muted.
oh, sorry about that. Can you hear me now? I don't know how I got muted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'll start over. So the program today is called The Huntington at 101. And the story I'm going to tell you is about a collection that took 95 of those 101 years to bring together. In May 1923, Mr. Huntington purchased a small manuscript collection consisting of 42 items. It was primarily letters and reports sent to Robert Saunders Dundas, who inherited the title Viscount Melville from his father, Henry Dundas, who was Lord President of the Admiralty. The collection spans just 2 years. It's 1812 to 1814, and it pertains to the War of 1812. So the contents of the collection do not offer any kind of deep, dark military secrets. Probably the most interesting thing about it is that there are some letters that convey anxieties on the parts of the British that the American Navy seems to be growing superior to their own, and they're quite anxious about this. But the collection offers a nice perspective and is a complement to Mr. Huntington's passions for collecting the history of England and America, or Britain and America. Over the decades, scholars have consulted it, but it's not something, this collection, it's not something we're particularly famous for. As one of my colleagues will frequently say, things like this are a perfectly fine brick in a very large brick wall. 90 years later, I started working at the Huntington in 2013. And one of the first things I did was reach out to rare book manuscript dealers to introduce myself because I was new to the profession. One of those dealers was Mags in London, and they responded to my introductory email by saying that they had recently discovered a cache of manuscripts that they think related to something we already had in the collections. So a back and forth conversation ensued, and we came to realize that in the early 1920s, the Dundas family sold to Mags a portion of the professional papers of Henry Dundas and his son. The collection was somehow split up, and Henry Huntington purchased a portion of it in 1923, and the second section is what Mags had discovered in 2013. That collection is what we call today the Hartford Jones papers. The Hartford Jones collection, sorry. It's 92 items, and it expands the scope of the collection to 1783 to 1814. Hartford Jones was a secretary in the East India Company, and in the 1780s he was stationed in Baghdad. And he'd written to Henry Dundas seeking political patronage. Dundas then hired him as his attaché and asked him to go to the court of the Persian Shah in the 1790s. And the British were there trying to negotiate kind of favor to keep the French, it's during the Napoleonic Wars, and they were trying to keep the French out of the Middle East to prevent them from gaining access to India. So the Hartford Jones letters are a series of private and confidential correspondence sent back to Dundas, relaying what he was seeing on the ground. Whereas Henry Huntington in the 1920s had a rather narrow view of what British and American empire and history looked like, I'm a scholar curator in the 21st century. And over the last 100 years, we think about empire in a much more global context. New imperial theories mean that we are really looking for ways to find voices on the ground to think of empire as something that was constructed from all over the place, not just something that kind of radiated out from the minds of people in London. The Hartford Jones papers are an important on-the-ground perspective that speaks to the kinds of questions that scholars ask today. I presented the collection to our Library Collectors Council in January 2014, and they acquired it. Then, 2 years later, Mags was about to move for the first time in almost 100 years, and they very famously started cleaning out their basement. When that happened, I got another email. They had found a third portion of the collection that the Library Collectors Council acquired in January 2018. This installment is the Henry Dundas papers, and it again expands the scope of the collection, this time from 1772 to 1814. It consists of 136 manuscripts, and it's again mostly correspondence and reports submitted to Henry Dundas in his role as Lord President of the Admiralty. The collection includes a series of letters from a governor in the West Indies called Andrew Cochrane Johnston, who was eager to try and recruit former enslaved men who had won their independence in the Haitian Revolution, and he wanted them to serve in a Black Corps for the British Empire. The collection also includes reports about British trade in India, and it recounts some conflict between the East India Company and the British Crown in the Philippines. Over the course of 95 years and through 3 separate acquisitions, we've been able to reunite the bulk of this collection, which offers detailed insights into 18th and 19th century perceptions of race, political patronage networks and how they operated, imperial administration, and foreign policy. This material now speaks to a global British history that just wasn't what Mr. Huntington was looking at in the 1920s. And as a curator, it's taught me 2 important lessons. You never know where a conversation is going to lead, and you never know what else is out there. Thanks.
Thank you, Vanessa, for that really fascinating story of an archive reassembled. You know, official and private correspondences are one of the richest sources for Huntington scholars. And now I will turn it over to Clay Stalls, who will tell us about a remarkable survival of family letters closer to home in Ventura County. Clay?
Thank you, Claudia, and thank you to Jen Johnson and LA Rare Books for having us today. In my 5 minutes of fame, I'm going to be discussing the serendipitous survival and interesting twists and turns of the provenance of a manuscript, Huntington manuscript collection. To do so, I'll first describe the collection and then address the matters of its provenance and survival. This collection is the Alvarado family letters, which consist of some realia and 41 letters written by Alvarado family members in Mexico to those members of the family who'd made the move to Southern California, probably sometime in the mid-1920s. The first letter bears the date of 1926. The last letter bears the date of 1954. These 41 letters were written principally by a man named Isidro Alvarado, living outside the city of León in Mexico, to his mother, father, and brother living in Southern California. Their names, Antonio, Clara, and Jose. And keep the name Jose Alvarado in mind because he's an important figure in my little story today. The family lived first in Reseda, California, and then moved to El Rio, a Mexican-American community in Ventura County. You can see how we can document the move by this envelope on the screen. We don't know Antonio's death date, but we do know that Clara died in 1954, and we know this date because of the hard investigative work of my colleague in the curatorial department, Anita Weaver. Thank you, Anita. And I'll discuss Jose a little bit more in a second. All told, the letters richly document critical aspects of migrant life. I'm going to highlight only one, the vital economic role in migrant life of remittances. There are frequent references to remittances in the letters, and these range from money to such items as sewing thread, as well as other items such as shoes. In the bigger picture of Huntington collection, these family letters fit into our traditional collecting of California history, California family history, including letters, and also our collecting in Hispanic culture and life in California. In our more recent collecting, these letters helped myself and my colleague Li Wei Yang develop our collections in migrant history in 20th and 21st century California. So it's an important collection and we're fortunate to have it. So with this context, now let me turn to the second part of my story and discuss Jose Alvarado and his friend Mark Moore. For a number of years, including his last years of his life, Jose lived on the Grather Farms in Ventura County, where he worked as a farm worker, as indeed all his family did. They were all farm workers. In truth, he lived his last years in sort of semi-retirement on the farm. Jose had no relatives, never married, had no children, so the Grathers allowed him to live on the farm, and in the last years of his life, he lived in semi-retirement. He ran the gopher traps on the farm. At any rate, in the mid-1970s, a man named Mark Moore came to the farms and began working there, mid to late 1970s, came to the farm and began working there and became friends with Jose. And this is clear from Mark's very fond remembrances and reminiscences of Jose. As a matter of fact, Mark and Jose lived side by side on the farms. Mark in a mobile trailer, Jose in some kind of detached bonus room. Mark worked on the farms until about 1980 when he left for Northern California, where he still lives and is retired. Jose died in 1982, and you have to remember that he had no immediate family members in the area, never married, had no children. So it was left up to the Grather family in the form of Father Robert and son John to take care of all the matters necessary that one has to take care of after someone's death. The Grathers arranged for Jose's funeral, and also they went through his living quarters to clean out material, to clean it out. And while doing that, they discovered a cache of letters. And of course, this cache of letters is the Alvarado family letters, now at the Huntington Library. And the amazing thing to me about this is that the Grathers didn't throw out the letters. Why, I don't know. Perhaps something about the letters spoke to them about Jose, but they didn't throw them out. At any rate, Mark returned to the farms in the mid-1980s for a visit. And because of his friendship with Jose, the Grathers asked Mark whether or not he wanted the letters. And Mark said yes, because he had a lot of good memories of Jose. And Mark held the letters for probably close to 30 years. And Mark has an interest in history, including the history of Mexico. He's traveled to Mexico a number number of times. He was always interested in the historical value of the letters. And he eventually made contact with one Andrew Sandoval Strauss, who's director of Latino Studies at Penn State and also a professor of history. Andrew contacted another academic colleague, matter of fact, a colleague whose family letters documenting her family's migrant life in California are here at the Huntington, the Chavez Esparza letters. In turn, Andrew contacted me. I told Andrew, yes, of course, we were interested in the letters. He put me in touch with Mark. Mark and I had a number of conversations, email conversations and phone conversations. And Mark sent me some digital images of the letters so I could read them and determine their scholarly value for the Huntington. Also, I could get a grasp of what their physical condition was as well. And Mark donated the letters to us in May 2019. We're very pleased to have them. The letters are fully processed, open to researchers. Of course, the Huntington Library is not open to readers right now, but the letters have all been digitized. And here's a screenshot of the digital landing page for the letters from the Huntington Digital Library. So to summarize the survival of the Alvarado family letters, Mark, remembering Jose's sense of humor, said that he thought Jose would be very amused by their donation to the Huntington Library. And perhaps one reason for this is that their survival, I think, is a commentary on the vagaries of our lives, as well as the vagaries of the survival of the evidence that documents our lives. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Clay. Extraordinary survivals and rescue operations. There are many that happen at the Huntington. Erin Chase will now tell us about one, a most intriguing addition to our Southern California architecture collections, which document the design of LA's built environment in the first half of the 20th century. Erin?
Thank you, Claudia. It's a pleasure to be talking to everybody today about acquisitions. So the acquisition I'm going to tell you about materialized from a cold call made to me by a Pasadena resident in 2006. The person calling me told me he had an original set of hand-rendered ink on linen drawings of the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, all dated to 1920. My ears perked up immediately since there had recently been a very public battle between the LA Conservancy and the LA Unified School District over the fate of the iconic hotel. The LAUSD had seized control over the hotel and planned to demolish the structure and clear the 23-acre site to construct a new school building. Local preservationists were up in arms over the battle, and there was numerous protests that took place publicly. Eventually, the Conservancy's efforts were fruitless, and the hotel was actually razed in January 2006 when I got the call, making this set of drawings extremely important for several reasons. For one, Myron Hunt's designs are prominent in Los Angeles, and particularly here in Pasadena, where he was awarded premier residential and public commissions, including the Huntington Hotel and numerous other hotels, including the Mission Inn in Riverside, the Rose Bowl, the Mount Wilson Observatory, Occidental College, and most importantly to us, the residence and library of Mr. Henry E. Huntington. In addition, there's no existing Myron Hunt archive anywhere, so building a collection of his work is dependent on donors coming to us with any drawings or materials they may have. The Huntington's own collection at the time consisted of the architectural renderings for buildings on our campus, such as the one here, some drawings for local residences that have been gifted to us over the years, a set of presentation lantern slides in our photo archives, and the Hunt family papers, which were gifted by a family member in 1958. So this donor told me the drawings had been in his garage for decades, which isn't really an unusual set of circumstances, especially when it comes to architectural drawings. In fact, it's pretty typical. But it was what he said next that would change my perception of this collection and the context I was coming into the conversation with. In our discussion, I learned that the drawings had come directly from the ambassador. Most likely they'd been given to the general manager shortly after construction in 1921, had remained there over the years, and were most likely used as reference for maintenance during its operation. Indeed, the hotel had numerous renovations made to it over time, most notably the overhaul of the interior and exterior, including the famed Coconut Grove by the architect Paul Williams in 1949. The club was already hit with Hollywood celebrities since its opening in 1921, but it was Paul Williams' redesign of the space that solidified its place as one of the hottest spots for dining and entertainment in the city, and it became notorious for hosting such A-listers as Frank Sinatra, Judy Garland, Bing Crosby, and Nat King Cole, to name a few. The hotel would also become notorious for one of the most tragic events in our nation's history, the assassination of Senator Robert F. Kennedy on June 5th, 1968. After accepting his nomination as the Democratic presidential nominee, the senator gave a brief victory speech to enthusiastic supporters in the embassy room of the ambassador. Shortly after midnight, Kennedy was escorted from the stage through the pantry off the main kitchen, where he was greeted by an excited kitchen staff when shots were fired. Kennedy would succumb to the bullet wounds the following day at Good Samaritan Hospital. The drawings for the ambassador were promptly seized by the Los Angeles Police Department and logged in as evidence, most likely used as reference for the trial in an effort to piece together a tragic event that is still not fully understood today. Among the set of 30 drawings are sheets identifying the kitchen and pantry area, the site of this horrible tragedy. These drawings remained in LAPD custody until 1989, when the police department contacted the ambassador's chief engineer of facilities, or in this case, our donor, who put them in his garage after the hotel shut down that same year forever. 17 years later, the drawings would be added to the Huntington's collection of Southern California architectural records. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin. The building doesn't survive what the drawings do. And they're now safe and sound, most appropriately, as you note, at a Myron Hunt designed library. Of course, they're not actually in the original library building. Our facilities have expanded over the century to accommodate the ever-growing Huntington collections. And thank goodness we were able to build the Munger Research Center, which made possible an en bloc library acquisition in the style of Mr. Huntington that Dan Lewis is going to tell us about now as our grand finale. Dan?
Welcome, fellow bibliophile. Thank you, Claudia, and our collective thanks to Jen and Brad Johnson, too. Incidentally, I'm happy to see some familiar names, if not faces, in attendance, including a number of Huntington alumni and alumna in the audience. So the Huntingtons had a history of science, medicine, and technology presence for decades, and really ever since Mr. Huntington's time. But in early 2005, it came to our attention that the Burndy Library at MIT, a collection some of you may be familiar with, really the fruits of most of the labors of renowned history of science collector Bern Dibner, was looking for a new home. And so we followed the procedures they laid out to apply for the collection. And it was a very unusual set of circumstances, because on offer were not just the materials, but some millions of dollars intended to permanently endow a number of positions here, cover an exhibit, manage cataloging, and so forth. So the collection, so we were the successful supplicant, and Brent Dibner later told me, he said, we really knew the Huntington was the right institution from the get-go, given the various bona fides and qualifications you had. So the collection went from an institution that got the same number of researchers in their reading room each year as we had in our reading room in a single week. And we were one of 16 supplicants for the collection, which comprises about 67,000 volumes and about 2,000 linear feet of archival collections. And so we were good candidates from the outset. You know, we didn't need a new building or a new wing, you know, to be funded by the Dibner family to make it all happen. As Claudia mentioned, we had just finished the Munger Research Center in the fall of 2004. So very handy, as it turned out. So negotiations began and investigations of all kinds to determine mutually acceptable terms, of course, and to ensure that the collections had some useful complementarity to our existing holdings in the history of science and technology, which were already very substantial and important. So what I want to tell here quite briskly and through some images is a story of the actual physical and logistical activity involved in moving this massive library across the country in an activity that involved, you know, 30 people on both coasts. And so you can see the scene in the parking lot outside of the Burndy Library in early November 2006 as we started to begin the loadout. The person with his back to the camera there is the late Phil Cronin. Some of you might have known Phil. He was the head of special collections at Dartmouth for a while before coming to the Burndy, which had moved from Connecticut to Cambridge in 1992. So we worried primarily about two things. The first was inclement weather, in the fall was unpredictable, especially on the East Coast. And the second was security. So we had to make a number of decisions. And the routing decision we made was to go as far south as we could reasonably go on major highways so that we would avoid ice and snow if we could help it. It was November, as I said. And the second was security. And so we salted a GPS unit in each of the 6 tractor trailer trucks that only Phil and I knew the codes to, and we set underway. So here are a few statistics about the move. We did it all in once a week, like clockwork. The truck showed up, everything arrived on time. And right before Thanksgiving, we received the very last of the trucks. And we had a wonderful group called the National Library Relocation Company, who really were remarkable helpmates and great communicators. If you ever need a great moving company, hire them. This is a scene of the pack out in the Dibner, the so-called Dibner vault, where they carefully unload the materials. Those yellow containers they used were fabulous. We did not lose a single item, and not a single item was damaged or crushed or even mislaid. And so they were very, very careful. Here's a shot leaving the building, which held the Dibner Institute, which is the research arm, as well as the library proper itself. And then the tractor trailers involved. And because we decided to do this under cover of darkness, so our 2 choices, back to the security point, were to really do it under cover of darkness, somewhat stealthily, or by day with a gigantic police escort. Given the total dollar value of the collection, we decided to opt for the more cautious evening, nighttime routing, which worked very well. And so set up a quick shelter to protect against inclement weather. And then in early November, off we went. And there's the MIT police escorting the first of the trucks out of the off the campus. And here we are at the Munger Research Center's loading dock, magically through the magic of digital slides. And we moved the stuff in. There are a number of tasks we had to undertake to integrate the materials into the collection. And I took to comparing this activity like docking a Soviet spacecraft with an American one. The parts weren't created in the same culture and with the same machining and with the same precision. So we had to get our hands on every book. We had to really essentially recatalog almost everything in the collection. We had to get our hands on every book to put a book plate in it and so on. And so we worked that all out. We had about 2 years to do the cataloging. Here's a section of the Munger Research Center filling up with books. Here I am very happy that this has all gone off without a nary hitch. The woman in the front is Marika Kay, who is the Dibner conservator at the time, who had been hired as one of the endowed positions we filled. And here's Alan, Jesse Allen. I saw your name on the list of participants, so there you are. Busy working over. Alan and I spent a lot of time together on both coasts working through these details. And just a quick thing about a couple of things in the collection. On the left is a manuscript by Altusi, a commentary on Ptolemy's Almagest. The Almagest, we have dates to 1279. This Altusi dates to probably sometime in the late 13th century or the early 14th century. And then many of you are familiar with Goethe's 1810 attack on Newton's theory of colors, Sir Farbenlaer. And then on the right is Isaac Newton's own handwritten, one of the pages from the Temple of Solomon, which is our longest Newton manuscript, runs to about 50 pages of handwritten text by Newton. And so it's been a fabulous success. We have fellowships for people doing research in the history of science and technology, and it's been nothing but a great bounty for the Huntington. Okay, and finally, thank you very much to you all, and I think now we're able to take questions, right?
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. All these presentations were so interesting, and I've just asked people if they have questions, we'll put them to please put them in chat, and we'll try to get to them as we go. And so I'll start off one really quickly, because several of you mentioned that some of these items came to the Huntington by way of donation. And so perhaps, particularly for people who might have some family papers in Southern California, perhaps Clay or Claudia, you want to answer what kinds of, how does one go about donating maybe family papers? What kinds of things might you be looking for?
Well, so I can just say that all of our contact information is up on our website, www.huntington.org. You go to About, and there's a staff directory. And you'll see the same pictures that you saw, and you'll see more pictures of more curators and their areas covered. And we also on our website, on the drop down for collections on the homepage, you can see our 14 intersecting collecting areas, which are, you know, well described for people to understand the kinds of materials we collect. But when in doubt, you should contact one of us who seems most appropriate. I get a lot of requests when people are not quite certain who would be the right one. In terms of California Family Papers, Clay can speak a bit about that.
Well, we're interested in any kind of material that has a significant run of detailed information about a person or a family. This can range from diaries to personal and business correspondence to government records concerning the family, any kind of personal records such as baptismal records, anything like that we're interested in. It's a broad range, and what we're looking for really is detailed information that a researcher can use that provides information about a certain period, time, and place, or person and family.
Great.
And we have a number of our family history collections online at the Online Archive of California. They're easy to browse, and that'll give you a sense of what kind of family history and what kind of materials we've been collecting.
Yeah, and we're really interested in a diversity of lived experience in California.
Great. So in chat, actually we have two people who are wondering a little bit more about the Dibner collection. Why did MIT divest of it, and when did it open in the library here at the Huntington?
So there were many complications involving it actually wasn't owned by MIT. It was in an MIT building that had been a primate lab and then modified to hold the library, but it was actually owned by the Dibner family who paid the rent on the building. And I think there's a long, complicated answer I won't give, but I think in essence, that the family was really tired of having to support the library year to year. And they really wanted to and they understood its utility. I think they were frustrated by the fact that it didn't have greater reach. And I think they finally came to the realization it needed to be at a bigger, more public institution, because it was, you know, it's a relatively small, dedicated collection in a building that wasn't, it wasn't ideal for various reasons. But I think essentially the family wanted to be rid of the year-to-year expenses and complications of running it themselves. The exhibit opened on November 3rd, 2008, the evening of the general election in which Obama and McCain were running against each other. And if you've been in the exhibit, you know there's a little spinny thing where you can put your own face on someone else's body. The designer made it one of Obama and one of McCain for the evening, and I just couldn't bring myself to put them out. Something would have gone terribly wrong, so I didn't. But it opened 12 years ago.
Wow, that is a while ago. Well, thank you very much. So I'm sure one of the things that people would like to know is, what's the status of the opening right now of the Huntington? What's the access that is happening right now at the Huntington? Oh, Claudia,
you're muted. You're muted.
Our gardens are open to the public by timed ticketing. It's a totally contactless process. So you do it online, and you can go to the website and easily find how to get a timed ticket to come in. At present, the museum spaces, the library exhibition spaces, and the reading rooms are not open to the public in accordance with LA County guidelines. And we post updates. Updates will be posted on the website.
Great, thank you.
But it's important, you'd asked us earlier to note that we are still at work. And so 1,000 reference queries have been answered since the closing in March. And we are working hard to make more available digitally. And we're also in the pilot phase of a kind of virtual consultation process where collections can be examined by a remote researcher with a staff member showing them through video. But that hasn't entirely opened up, and we look forward to announcing that when it does.
Great, thank you. Well, it looks like we're running close on time. It's been a fantastic presentation. I wish we could do it once a week, but I'm sure you guys would be glad not to do it once a week. But there are lots of programs on the Huntington's website that you can definitely take advantage of. In chat, we've just put the link for the huntington.org. I hope, like me, that you all out there will consider becoming a member of the Huntington and renewing your memberships, because that's important, because we need to have institutions like the Huntington around for when we can be together again, which will happen sometime safely in the future. In the meantime,
and before you sign off, Jen, a big thank you to you for inviting the Huntington, and to all our Huntington colleagues who make our acquisitions work possible, and also Anita Weaver, who helped us with our PowerPoint. So it's really great that this fair happens and that we can be a part of it.
And thank you to Mauro Anati and Holly Mendenhall and the other staff of our digital library program for digitizing the Alvarado family letters. They deserve a big thanks.
Thank you all so much. And I encourage everybody to take some time and shop at Rare Books LA Virtual Book Fair. You can find it at rarebooksla.com and just hit shop. So we thank you so much again. Have a good evening.